As the pilot stood firm in his position, blocking Melania Trump from boarding her jet, a heavy silence fell over the runway. A few onlookers from nearby terminals had already started whispering, their phones out, trying to catch a glimpse of the unexpected scene. But what was truly happening behind the scenes wasn't just about a simple travel delay. The air between Melania and the pilot was thick with unspoken tension. Melania, usually composed in the public eye, seemed unsettled. Her eyes scanned the pilot, trying to understand what was going on, as though she couldn't quite believe this was happening to her. After all, she was no stranger to power and authority. She had spent years in the White House, where every movement, every gesture, was scrutinized by the media. But this wasn't Washington. This was a private flight, and things were about to take a turn she didn't expect. The pilot, a man with a calm demeanor, but a hint of nervousness, had a story of his own. His name was Mark Dawson, a man who had flown some of the most high-profile figures in the world. He had a reputation for discretion, professionalism, and loyalty to his clients. But Mark wasn't just any pilot. He was caught in a web that reached beyond his control, a secret network, a dangerous circle of powerful figures who had their own motives and agendas. He had always stayed on the sidelines, never getting too close to the action. But this time, his conscience was pushing him to make a decision he never imagined. Earlier that week, Mark had received a cryptic call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but the message was chilling. He was told to keep a close eye on Melania Trump's flight, to make sure nothing went wrong. But it wasn't just about the usual flight protocols. This was something bigger, something more dangerous. Mark knew that if he didn't comply, the consequences could be severe. But if he did, he was about to risk everything he had built in his career. Meanwhile, Melania's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. Why was Mark doing this? Why was he stopping her from getting on the jet? She had been in this world long enough to know when something was off, but this felt different. The uneasy feeling in her stomach grew stronger. Was this about her past, something she had tried to leave behind? Or was there a deeper, more sinister reason? The pilot's reluctance wasn't the only problem. As the minutes ticked by, the tension on the tarmac escalated. The airport security, who had initially remained on the periphery, started to move closer, sensing that this wasn't just an ordinary delay. Something was happening, but no one seemed to understand what it was. The crowd that had gathered was beginning to murmur in confusion. The rumors of a scandal began to swirl, amplified by the presence of cameras. What was really going on between Melania and Mark Dawson? Was this just a standoff, or was there more at play? As the standoff continued, another figure emerged from the shadows, someone who had been quietly observing the situation unfold from a distance. A mysterious man, known only by his initials, JB, appeared. JB wasn't just a bystander. He was someone with connections that ran deep within the political and business circles. His arrival sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. He walked with purpose, his eyes locked on Melania and the pilot. He knew exactly what was happening. Mark had been in contact with him just days before, and JB had given him a simple, yet ominous warning. Asterisk, do what you need to do to stop her from boarding or else, asterisk. Melania's instincts told her that this wasn't just an ordinary conflict over travel arrangements. She had been targeted, but by who? Why her? She had been living a life far from the public spotlight since leaving the White House, quietly working on personal projects and trying to keep a low profile. But something from her past, something dark and unresolved, was coming to the surface. The situation was escalating rapidly. Mark's anxiety was palpable, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could maintain control. His hands clenched the handle of his suitcase as he shot a brief glance toward JB. That silent exchange spoke volumes. Whatever Mark's next move was, it had to be decisive. If he let Melania board the jet, there was no turning back. And if he stopped her, well, he didn't want to think about the consequences. As Melania stood there, trying to gauge the situation, the truth was slipping further out of her reach. She had always believed she had control over her own destiny. But now she was caught in a game where the stakes were much higher than she ever imagined. It was clear that the people around her, including Mark and JB, had their own agendas, and if she didn't act fast, she would be swept into something much bigger than herself. Mark took a deep breath, his mind racing with thoughts of what was coming next. The crowd, now whispering urgently, sensed that the moment of truth was near. And just as Melania turned to speak, trying to regain some semblance of composure, Mark finally spoke. "I can't let you board this plane, Melania. Not now, not until I know the truth." The words hung in the air, charged with tension, and everything went quiet. But just before Melania could respond, the ground beneath them seemed to shift. Something was happening, something neither of them had expected, and what happened next would change everything. The mystery deepened, and the audience, along with Melania and Mark, were left standing on the precipice, unsure of what was coming next. Stay with us. The secrets are just beginning to unravel, and the next twist is one no one could have seen coming. As Mark's words hung in the air, the tension was so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. Melania, taken aback, stood frozen, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. What truth? She thought, her mind racing. She had been in countless high-pressure situations, but nothing quite like this. The crowd, sensing that something monumental was unfolding before their eyes, held their breath. Mark's refusal to let her board her jet had gone from a simple inconvenience to a full-blown crisis. And then, without warning, a shift in the atmosphere occurred, a quiet but undeniable presence that sent a shiver down their spines. JP was no longer standing at the edge, watching from the shadows. He had moved closer, his every step purposeful, a man of influence who didn't just observe, he controlled. His eyes were locked on Melania, but it wasn't her he was focused on. He had known this moment was coming. In fact, he had orchestrated it. The truth was darker than anyone could have anticipated, and now everything was about to spill into the open. Mark, visibly shaken, looked at JB and then back at Melania. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He was just a pilot, wasn't he? A man trying to do the right thing, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now Mark realized he wasn't just part of some conspiracy. He was at the center of it. A moment of clarity hit him hard. He had been playing a game far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Melania, ever composed, knew this was the moment of reckoning. Whatever this was about, it wasn't just a simple miscommunication or power play. She had spent years in the White House, navigating the most dangerous political waters, but this was something else entirely. It was personal. It was about her, and the pilot. He wasn't just a man doing his job. He was entangled in something that had her name written all over it. "You can't stop me, Mark," she said softly, but there was a fire in her voice now, a strength that came from a place of raw determination. "Whatever you think you know, whatever this is about, it ends now." Mark hesitated, and for the first time, it seemed like the weight of the situation truly hit him. His eyes flicked to JB, who stood still, watching everything unfold with cold, calculating precision. The truth was too much for Mark to handle. It wasn't just about Melania's flight, it was about secrets, deep, dark secrets, that reached all the way into the highest echelons of power. Mark had been protecting the wrong people. Just as it seemed like everything would collapse into chaos, a voice broke through the tension. It wasn't Mark, Melania, or even JB. It came from an unexpected source, a security officer who had been watching from a distance. In a voice laced with authority, he spoke. "I'm afraid you're all in way over your heads," the officer said, his words slicing through the air like a blade. He stepped forward, and with him came several others, all dressed in plain clothes. The truth, the real truth, was more shocking than anything anyone had prepared for. The officer revealed that he had been investigating JB for years. His organization, an underground network that spanned across continents, was pulling the strings of political events, pulling the wool over the eyes of the public. Mark, unknowingly, had been used as a pawn to get to Melania. The scandal, the pressure, and the manipulation. They were all tied to one thing, a high-stakes game of control. Melania's heart raced, but this time it wasn't fear, it was clarity. She had been right all along. The people she thought were allies, the people who had appeared to be in control, had been hiding the truth from her. Mark, caught in the web of lies, had finally cracked. JB, who had always been one step ahead, was now exposed. As the security officers closed in, JB made one final, desperate attempt to escape. But it was too late. The truth was out, and with it all the power that had kept him hidden in the shadows had evaporated. The public would know what he had done, what he had been a part of. The game was over. For Mark, there was a bittersweet relief. He had done the right thing in the end, even if it had come at great personal cost. For Melania, the ordeal had been a reminder of how fragile power could be, how easily it could be manipulated. But it was also a victory. She had faced the truth head-on, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence her. The runway, once a place of tension and uncertainty, now felt like a quiet, almost surreal place. The jet was still there, but it no longer mattered. The real battle had been fought and won, not in the air, but on the ground. As the crowd dispersed, murmurs of the incident spreading like wildfire, Melania stood tall, her gaze unwavering. She had walked into a storm, but she had emerged stronger. And as for Mark, his future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. This wasn't just about a pilot blocking a former First Lady from boarding her jet. It was about power, control, and the secrets that lie beneath the surface. And in the end, the truth had come out. But at what cost? Only time would tell. For now, the story was over. But for Melania, the journey was just beginning. "It's not a big deal," Baron interrupted gently, turning to him with a small, reassuring smile. "Think of it as a birthday present for your mom." The boy stared at him, a mix of gratitude and disbelief washing over him. He didn't know what to say. No one had ever done something like this for him before. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Baron nodded, his expression unreadable. The shopkeeper quickly completed the transaction, sliding the bagged items across the counter. Baron picked up the carved box, giving the boy a small nod before heading toward the door. But just as he reached it, he paused and turned back. "You remind me of someone," Baron said, his tone thoughtful. "Someone who cared more about making others happy than himself. Don't lose that. It's rare." The boy didn't know how to respond. He just nodded, clutching the bag with the music box tightly as Baron walked out into the fading light of the evening. For a moment, the boy stood there, the events of the last few minutes feeling almost surreal. But something about Baron's words lingered, echoing in his mind. Who had he reminded Baron of? And why had Baron gone out of his way to help him? The boy stepped outside, the cool air brushing against his face as he watched Baron disappear into a sleek black car parked at the curb. A part of him wanted to call out, to ask for answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he turned and began walking home, the music box clutched in his hands like a treasure. As he made his way through the quiet streets, a strange sense of hope filled him, mingled with curiosity about the encounter he'd just experienced. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this chance meeting, was only the beginning of a story far bigger than he could have imagined. Something had shifted, not just in his world, but in Baron's too. And whatever lay ahead, their paths were now connected in ways neither of them could fully understand. The boy quickened his pace, eager to get home and give his mom her gift, unaware that the events of this day would soon ripple far beyond the walls of their small apartment, drawing others into a story that was just beginning to unfold. As the boy reached the door of his apartment, his heart raced with anticipation. The music box felt heavier in his hands, not because of its weight, but because of the meaning it now carried. He turned the key, stepping inside to find his mom sitting on the worn-out couch, her hair pulled back and her uniform still on after a long shift. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that could light up the darkest of days. "Hey, sweetie," she said, her voice warm but tired. How was your day?" The boy hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain everything that had happened. Instead, he simply held out the neatly wrapped bag. "Happy birthday, Mom." Her eyes widened, and she looked at the bag, then back at him. "You didn't have to," she began, but he shook his head. "Just open it," he said, unable to hide his excitement. Carefully, she unwrapped the paper and lifted the music box out of the bag. Her fingers traced the smooth wood as she opened it, letting the soft melody fill the room. Her eyes glistened as she listened, and for a moment, it seemed like all the exhaustion she carried melted away. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." The boy grinned, feeling a wave of pride and relief. "I wanted you to have something special," he said, "because you're always taking care of me, and I wanted you to know how much I love you." She pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as the music played on. "I don't need anything else," she said softly. "This is perfect. You're perfect." As they sat together, the boy thought back to the shop, to Baron Trump's unexpected kindness and the strange connection they'd shared. He didn't understand why someone like Baron had chosen to help him, but he felt grateful. It wasn't just about the gift. Baron's gesture had reminded him that there was good in the world, even in the most unexpected places.